It's very nearly the end of not just the year, but the entire decade. But rather than let ourselves feel old, we've decided to round up our favourite games of the past 10 years.
That is a very long time. We started out the 2010s with a completely different console generation, the Xbox 360, and some of our picks come from that console.
But every game on our list you can play all right now on Xbox One.
A lot of them are even on Xbox Game Pass, so you can experience the best of the decade just by picking up a month's subscription.
Let's start with the newest game on our list, but also the oldest because it's a remake of a game that didn't come out this decade or even this millennium.
The original Resident Evil 2 was a survival horror classic back in 1998, but in resurrecting it for 2019, Capcom did far more than just give the game a new coat of paint.
It's a complete, from the ground up, reimagining that borrows the best bits from all the Resident Evil games that have come out in the meantime. You've got the over-the-shoulder action from Resi 4, with the RE engine from Resi 7, bringing some high-def horror and a bucket of brilliantly squishy gore.
You can choose to explore the zombie-infested Raccoon City as either Claire or Leon, each offering a different perspective on the story and some unique challenges and scares if you decide to replay.
You never know quite what's going to jump out at you, especially when the game introduces Mr. X, the terrifying tyrant who randomly roams the Raccoon police station and hunts you down.
He's unstoppable, so the sound of his footsteps approaching is very bad news.
You'll never be more scared of a man in a fedora.
And if you haven't played Resident Evil 2, now's a great time to spook yourself with it because there's a follow-up coming next April, a remake of Resident Evil 3 with a brand new competitive multiplayer.
And speaking of games with sequels that we're very excited for, next on our list is Ori and the Blind Forest, an indie gem that looks like a Studio Ghibli film and plays like a deceptively tough Metroidvania.
The 2010s has been pretty huge for Metroidvanias, a type of action-adventure game where you explore a massive interconnected world map, finding secrets and shortcuts, and opening up areas by unlocking new abilities.
We've had everything from the family-friendly presentation of the SteamWorld Dig games to the bloody hack and slash of Dead Cells, and the moody Hollow Knight, which is a bit like a Dark Souls game but starring a load of bugs.
But none did Metroidvania better than Moon Studios, combining with pitch-perfect platforming and combat and some amazing powers that boost your abilities in both.
Plus, under it all, there's a well-told coming-of-age story that begins with one of the most emotional opening sequences since Pixar's Up.
If you missed out on Ori and the Blind Forest the first time round, you can now pick up the Definitive Edition, which expands the world and your arsenal of powers, included with an Xbox Game Pass subscription.
You might even be able to finish it in time for the next installment, Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisps, arriving in 2020.
There have been lots of games that have told utterly brilliant stories this decade, like Ori, like the Life is Strange series, and a couple of other games we'll be getting to later on this list.
But our next pick, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, told a story unlike any other.
The game introduces Senua, a Celtic warrior walking into Hell, the Viking underworld, to rescue the soul of her dead lover.
As if that wasn't hard enough, Senua suffers with psychosis, and what really makes this game special is how developer Ninja Theory took advantage of things only video games can do in order to tell a powerful story about mental health.
It might play out in third person, but it puts you right inside Senua's head. You experience every bit of psychosis right alongside her through hallucinations overlaid on your vision and voices constantly whispering in your ears, so it's hard to tell what's real.
Hellblade makes incredible use of binaural audio so that you hear the position of every voice in 3 dimensions. This is a game you're going to really want to play with headphones on, creating an atmosphere unlike any other game.
Ninja Theory are currently working on a very different game indeed, the multiplayer brawler Bleeding Edge coming out in March, but they've also just announced a sequel to this game, Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, coming to Xbox Series X.
Along with those follow-ups we've already mentioned, it's looking like a very strong start to the next decade of games.
Our first Xbox 360 game on this list comes from the very start of the decade, way back in 2010.
But it stood the test of time. unlike most things in this game's bombed-out setting.
As the name suggests, Fallout New Vegas takes you to the post-apocalyptic version of America's Neon Sin City for a standalone adventure.
It built on the successful formula established by Fallout 3, an open-world RPG where you're free to build your own character and roam across the wasteland, taking on quests or just wandering the wasteland.
You can get into fights, either treating the game as a standard first-person shooter or activating VATS to tactically target body parts.
You can go hunting for crafting materials to make everything you need to survive, or you can hit those famous casinos to try and win big on blackjack, roulette, or caravan, a card game invented specifically for New Vegas.
It's completely up to you. New Vegas is still remembered as possibly the best Fallout game ever, which is pretty high praise, especially given it was a spin-off from the main Bethesda series.
Stepping in for dev duties were Obsidian Entertainment, who ended the decade by becoming part of Xbox Game Studios and releasing the excellent Outer Worlds, a kind of spiritual successor to this game, so its legacy lives on. Viva New Vegas!
Once upon a time, there was a game called Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars about, well, you can probably guess what it was about.
Despite that excellent title, it didn't do particularly well, and it seemed like that would be the end of that, until 7 years later, a sequel crashed onto the scene and took the world by storm.
Yep, we're talking about Rocket League. It might have changed the name to be slightly less of a mouthful, but this is very much a game about acrobatic rocket-powered cars doing battle on the football pitch.
Except the balls are enormous and the pitches loop up the walls and across the ceiling.
Oh, and the cars can do stunts, from scissor kicks to somersaults.
It's a genius concept for a video game, and it finally found the audience it deserved with Rocket League.
More than 50 million people have played the game, and years on from release, it's still going strong, with new cars and cosmetics being added all the time.
And it's still an amazingly fun multiplayer game, whether you're all in the same room going head to head on a single screen or teaming up over Xbox Live to take down some online rivals.
Next, let's pump the brakes a little for a game with a much slower pace of life. With Red Dead Redemption 2, GTA developer Rockstar headed back to the Old West, where your main mode of transportation has roughly 1 horsepower and everything has to be done by hand.
But it's worth slowing down for, because this is the most vivid and lifelike gaming world Rockstar has ever made, which, let's be honest, means it's probably the most vivid and lifelike gaming world anyone has ever made.
You step into the cowboy boots of Arthur Morgan and explore the swamps, desert plains, and snowy peaks of turn-of-the-century America.
Along the way, you take part in heists, chases, and every bit of criminal activity the Van der Linde gang gets involved in, and get swept up in the game's story.
It's a powerful tragedy, one that really hits you because the game feels so lifelike.
Every action, whether it's firing off your six-shooter or just brewing some coffee, requires methodical effort from the player, and this gigantic world is realized down to the tiniest details.
Like literally down to Arthur's hair and beard growing as you play. It's like a whole nother life you can dip into just by firing up your Xbox.
It's kind of weird now to think that back in 2010, if you said the words Battle Royale, pretty much all people would think of was that one Japanese film about the school kids all killing each other.
PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG as most of us actually call it, took that loose idea and turned it into an online shooter that pitted 100 players against one each other. And voila, a brand new genre was born.
And okay, PUBG might not have been quite the first Battle Royale game. That title probably goes to an earlier DayZ mod made by Brendan Green, the PlayerUnknown himself. But it was definitely the one that pushed it into the mainstream, complete with squads versus duos, a shrinking force field, and those all-important chicken dinners.
But most of all, PUBG just took the amazing idea of 100 players duking it out on an island and executed it beautifully. And that was enough to change games forever. Or, well, at least for all the time since its launch.
You know how earlier we said Ori and the Blind Forest looked like an animated film and played like something very hard? Well, Cuphead is like that, but with all of it dialed up to 11.
Every moment of the game is hand-drawn to look exactly like a cartoon from the 1930s, using the same so-called rubber hose style as early Disney animations.
Your character, Cuphead, is a cute little chap with a cup for a head, obviously.
But don't let that cuteness fool you. This is a viciously difficult video game. It jumps between a side-scrolling run-and-gun platformer, a bullet hell shooter, and some gloriously tough boss battles. Oh, those boss battles.
If you can hear the name King Dice without cursing, you've clearly never played Cuphead.
The whole game can be played in local co-op, which doesn't necessarily make things easier, but at least you'll have a friend to share the joyful agony and coo all over the pretty pictures with.
Next up, a game that's truly shipshape. Sea of Thieves, the high sea hijinks generator that lets us live out all our pirate fantasies with a boatload of friends.
You share a galleon, working together to steer it across the high seas and towards the next bit of loot or skeleton smashing adventure. And if that leaves you feeling a bit out of your depth, there's always the option to just pull out an instrument and start playing a sea shanty to lift everyone's spirits.
Since it launched in 2018, the game has kept growing, adding everything from raids to a competitive arena. And pets. Don't forget the pets.
It recently moved onto a schedule of monthly content updates, so there's always guaranteed to be more stuff coming over the horizon. So whether you're a salty sea dog or a land-loving newcomer, it's always worth checking in on Sea of Thieves, and come the 2020s, it'll probably be an even better game.
And finally, let's close out this half of the list with our 11th best game of the decade, a classic that was underappreciated on release, but has found a cult audience in the years since.
And rightly so, because Titanfall 2 is fantastic, whichever way you cut it. Massive robots who are your best friend, plus parkour, wall running and jumping. Most of the team behind the original Modern Warfare inventing their own sci-fi universe.
And also an amazingly inventive campaign, and one of the best team-based multiplayer shooters around. What more could you want?
Titanfall is set in the same universe as Apex Legends, and the two share a developer.
That's helped put more eyes on the game, meaning more players and mechs to smash up in multiplayer. And more people discovering that amazing time travel level for the very first time.
If you haven't experienced it for yourself, we won't say any more, just go and play Titanfall 2 as soon as you get the chance.
It's the 11th best Xbox game of the decade, after all. So there we have it, that's our first half of the best games of the decade. We're going to be checking out the top 10 in our next video, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out, and share what your favourite is down in the comments below.
If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave us a like, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.
Bye.